Here we go, 7 straight weeks to end the season. No more bye weeks, no more time to relax, time to see what these Ohio State Buckeyes are all about. I'm Doug Lesmerises. Thank you for joining us here on our weekly Ohio State show. Of course, as you know, the Buckeyes were off last week for the second time this season. They were a little frustrated, I think, about the momentum, maybe slowing down a little bit, but now they're back at it. And I think we're finally going to find out really what this team is about, along with Bill Landis and Ari Wasserman. We've taken some time to sort of reset during this sort of weird period where they had a bye week, then played twice, then had another bye week. Now the Buckeyes getting ready to host Rutgers at 3:30 on Saturday. Bill, just as we talked to Urban Meyer and the coaches and the players on Monday, just sort of how do you think they feel about where things are right now? They're number 13 in both polls. There's still a lot out there in front of them. They're not quite in the national title mix at the moment. How do the Buckeyes feel about where things stand?
I think I got a sense that they feel, I don't want to say comfortable because comfortable is not the right word, but I think they feel pretty good about where they are now considering what happened in week 2. I think when that loss to Virginia Tech happened, there was a lot of doom and gloom, maybe not from them, but certainly around the program about, is this season over? And clearly it's not. They're ranked 13th. They're kind of on the cusp of being in the playoff conversation. So I think there's some optimism that way, but mostly I got kind of a sense of anger. Maybe anger is not the right word either, but they were.
I mean, Tyvis Powell said they're angry that they're not in that top echelon of the talk of the playoff stuff.
Yeah, I think they're mad, possibly even more now about that Virginia Tech loss because they see what could have been if they were sitting at 5-0 right now instead of 4-1.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a thing today about, in 2012, Urban Meyer's first year, all we heard about was how tight this team was, and they figured out the leadership, and they had the toast at the Michigan State game, and everybody got, together. And then last year they had the leadership committee, and they had a bunch of seniors, and they were all together. I'm not buying anything about that, like the loss brought them together or anything like that. But the loss did change the context of the year a little bit. It's been 38 days right now, Ari, since that Virginia Tech loss. Are you surprised at all about where we stand, how you feel about this team right now, 38 days removed from that, or how the Buckeyes feel about themselves right now?
I'm pretty surprised. I thought this was going to be kind of a long year for Ohio State standards. After they lost to Virginia Tech, I was looking, and there was a chance at the time. Remember, we thought they might lose to Cincinnati. They could have had 2 non-conference losses. I mean, it's crazy to think that if you go back and you think about this show a month ago or whenever it was before they played Cincinnati, the topic was, what would happen if Ohio State lost to Cincinnati? Now all of a sudden they've rattled off 50 points in 3 straight games. They're playing 3 very manageable opponents in the next 3 weeks, so there's a lot of talk about stifling of momentum, but they have a really big chance to get it back right now. So I'm pretty surprised, and I think that Michigan State game is going to feel and mean a lot more than I thought it might after they lost Virginia Tech.
I mean, frankly, it's fun, every Big Ten game is manageable. I mean, as we talk about the Big Ten.
It's the kindest word I could have used, man.
I mean, it really is. I mean, they feel like this Rutgers team on Saturday maybe is going to give them a little bit of a defensive look. They feel like maybe Rutgers has a quarterback who's maybe going to make some plays. I think much more, at least, than the Maryland quarterbacks did. Maybe they're. I mean, not that Gary No's been perfect either. It's you're grasping at things, but. The Penn State defense the next week, maybe we will start to learn more.
It's crazy to me if you look at the schedule, if you look at how they've done so far. They're 13th, and as Bill said, maybe, I don't know if they're on the cusp just yet of the playoff conversation, but they have that 13th, there's about a month between now and the Michigan State game. Think about how much can change in a month. You've seen how much can change in 2 weeks. Then if they could beat Michigan State, then they play Minnesota, Indiana, and Michigan. I don't see a game that they're, based on what I've seen so far, and I'm surprised I'm saying this, because earlier on in the year, I thought this was a team that was susceptible to the upset, but I don't think, there's only 1 more game left in the regular season. I think they actually have a shot at really losing. So to sit here and say that right now, that means, and that's indicative of, I think, how much they've transformed in the last month.
I mean, I don't think we want to get ahead of ourselves too much. We still, you can only play the schedule you play, but, again, it's hard to judge necessarily too much on who they've played the last 3 weeks. I think it's an interesting conversation about the progress of this team in that there were a lot of sure things last year. especially once they got rolling. And as people sort of we've asked them, how do you feel about this year compared to last year? I think people may be forgetting a little bit how before the end of the year last year, before the really close Michigan win and then the 2 losses, Ohio State looked awesome.
Yeah.
They were great
Yeah.
for a month. And you knew the offensive line, you knew Braxton Miller, you knew Ryan Shazier, you knew some things. Urban Meyer, when we asked him about this yesterday, was talking about the idea that there are guys on this team who were not big contributors before, who they feel like they found some things out about the past couple weeks. That starts with JT Barrett, but he mentioned a guy like Nick Vannett, who's played well while Jeff Hireman was hurt. He talked about a guy like Michael Thomas, who has emerged as looking like the top receiver. It does feel like, I think you had to have that. It does feel like in certain places that has happened a little bit, where guys are starting to reach the point where maybe you can say, well, Michael Thomas isn't really maybe a question anymore. Maybe you know what he's going to do.
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of question marks coming into the year, not the least of which obviously was quarterback with JT Barrett. And I think, especially offensively, a lot of those, I don't want to say they've been answered, but I think the questions have been tempered a bit. I think there's not as much concern around some positions as there might have been coming into the season. But again, I hate to be like negative about how well they played, because I have played well, but I still, they've played well, but I'm not convinced that that's like the real picture because of who they've played.
Do you think Rutgers is a test?
No, I don't. I don't think Rutgers is a test, and what we saw out of Penn State, I don't think Penn State's a test. I don't think Illinois is a test. And the thing that we've talked about since the beginning of their little run is that if they get by Cincinnati, and they did that impressively, they deserve credit for that. We're going to just be treading water talking about this stuff. The thing that is interesting to me, and going back to the original point, is there a sure thing on this team? Do we know that Michael Thomas is going to catch a touchdown in every game? Do we know that Ezekiel Elliott's going to rush for 115 yards and 4.5 yards or more per carry? I don't think we know any of that yet. I think they've looked impressive. I think 3 more weeks of it will make it feel more of a sure thing. And last year, like you said, Ohio State had those sure things. I'm not necessarily sure I'm ready to make anybody on this Ohio State offense, especially a sure thing. But every week that goes by where they continue to do what they're doing, it makes you feel more comfortable. And then I think the final exam is going to be November 8th at Michigan State, because if they can get by them, and I'm still not sure they're going to, but that's really, in my mind, the only real test they have left from the regular season.
This may be strange to try to do now, 5 games into the 2014 season, but there was a comment in one of the discussions in one of our stories that I wanted to bring up that made me think about things a little bit differently. And we certainly invite you to comment in all our stories if you have any comments you want to add to the discussion right now. But the idea of the playoffs aren't the end-all be-all necessarily for this team right now, because they have so many young players and so much of this team is going to be back in 2015. Of course, you never want to take any season for granted. Just when you think, oh, we're targeting this year, then something crazy happens, an injury happens, a weird bounce. You have to take each season as it comes. But the idea that if the playoffs don't happen, but they reach a good bowl, they have a good season, they're building for something in 2015, I think is an interesting point to make, because when you look at the starters on this team on offense and defense, 11 of the 22 are freshmen or sophomores. There's only 7 seniors among the starters. Yes, you'll miss a guy like Duran Grant at corner. You'll miss a guy like Michael Bennett on the defensive line. You'll miss a guy like Jeff Hireman. But they have other people that'll fill in. They're going to lose Devin Smith and Evan Spencer as receivers, but they have depth at receiver. Do you feel like they are building something? And although we don't want to get too far ahead, can you see 2014 laying a foundation for what could be coming in 2015 with the young guys, and then we'll get to this with maybe Braxton Miller coming back?
Yeah, I thought after the Virginia Tech loss, I thought that was kind of going to be the theme of this season. We'll get, and that was at the time when I thought maybe they'd lose 1 or 2 more games, and this would be a season where you'd still win 9 and you still get to a good bowl, but it kind of was more about laying the foundation for the future and getting these young guys experience. I still think it's kind of about that, but I think there's more to play for now than I originally anticipated after that loss in week 2. But I think it's kind of human nature to kind of want to look to the future and see how good this team can be in 2015. I mean, you look at almost every skill guy coming back, will be coming back next year. The quarterback situation, which we'll talk about in a bit, is kind of clouded, I would say, at this
Clouded,
point.
it's a good word.
Yeah. But I think if you look all 22 starting positions, there's a lot coming back for 2015. So I think it's natural to be looking ahead to that a bit. But I'm not so sure Ohio State's looking ahead. But I think it's natural for the fan base to be looking ahead.
You wrote about this before the season, about how this team in 2014 was even starting to be a little bit more of the Urban Meyer kind of team, especially offensively. And I think we're seeing that. I mean, I guess they're on the path where in 2015 you even get more of that, right?
I mean, it's interesting because last year, when you play the game of targeting a year to win a national title and to do everything at the peak, wasn't last year the perfect example of it? Ohio State had a very veteran team.
I thought last year was the year.
That was the year, right?
Yeah.
And their schedule was set up perfectly. They didn't really play any of the you get it. It was the
Right.
year. So I don't want to play that game. I think the goal of where this program is going to be is that every single year, regardless of what Ohio State does, Urban Meyer's vision is that next year they're building for something. Mm-hmm. So right now they've got youthful players, but I think Urban Meyer said it at the beginning of his tenure at Ohio State. If they're doing things right, people are leaving early.
Right.
And they want people coming through, and every year they need to be stacked. So right now it's good to see that they have 11 sophomores and freshmen. I mean, that means that it's going to be a really good team for, and their juniors are probably mostly going to come back. So, of course, they're going to be a lot better next year. And then we'll talk about Braxton a little bit more. But I think the goal is that when those freshmen and sophomores now leave, that the freshmen and sophomore that step in are going to be really good too. So I like the idea of building and being in a good situation next year. But I think the main goal of the program is that this is a top 10, top 5 national title contender every year, and that's done through recruiting.
I mean, it's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be a lot to be gained in East Lansing on November 8th, win or lose. Obviously more if they win.
Yeah.
But, I mean, last year to play that tough Michigan State team and play that tough game, that was it's a neutral site. And we know that Ohio State fans travel great. This is going to be prime time at Michigan State, where they've talked about they need their students and their crowd to do a little bit more, but you have to anticipate that the Michigan State crowd's going to be nuts for that. That's going to be a huge environment and a huge test for everybody on this team, and I do think that you can gain things out of that just because you don't get it every week in the Big Ten. We don't have to remind you of that. That's just not the reality of every week where you're going into a Lions den and thinking, we have a chance to lose this week. Most of the time, Ohio State thinks, yeah, we're going to win. So that's going to be a huge test for them. And we've mentioned it a million times. We'll get to it now. We don't want to sensationalize this imaginary discussion, but I think we can't avoid it. Our friend Bill Livingston wrote about it. People have talked about it. Urban Meyer's been asked about it. In 2015, what will the quarterback situation be? This is assuming, and we don't know this, that Braxton Miller is back and healthy. It's a long enough recovery time that I think that it's certainly possible that he's not doing much until camp next year, that you really are going to have some uncertainty. But, Ari, if Braxton Miller is back and is physically ready to play, is there any question in your mind that he should be the starting quarterback, or is there something JT Barrett could do or has already done to cloud that picture and make you think that JT Barrett should be the quarterback?
If Braxton Miller is what he was last year, and that's not saying he's, we can't give him the benefit of the doubt that he's going to improve dramatically because he's not throwing. But if he could be the player that he was last year, the guy that won the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year, I personally have a hard time going against that. Now, we have a comment about the dilemma that can create, and we'll get to it. But right now, I just believe that Braxton Miller, if he was on this team right now, they'd be undefeated and one of the favorites to go to the national championship game.
The thing that people seem to like about JT Barrett the most is that he's making good decisions. He's getting the ball out. He's distributing. He's not throwing picks lately. Do you think if Braxton Miller was the quarterback right now, that most of those things would be happening with him too? Or are there things that JT Barrett is doing better than Braxton Miller would be doing?
I think that there's this weird obsession with Ohio State fans because it's been so long since they've had a player like JT at quarterback, dating back to I mean, Troy Smith was the perfect example of it in 06 of a precision pocket passer, and I think that that's kind of the vision of what they think JT might be able to be. But like, I think for whatever reason, Ohio State fans are sick of the Terrell Pryor model, where it's a very freakishly good athlete who can run all over the place and do those things, but might not look pretty throwing the ball. And I think JT's looked pretty good throwing it with form and everything. And I think there's a foundation there of like, well, if we just keep at it, this guy doesn't turn it over much. He has great form throwing it. He seems to make a good decision maker. If we continue to roll with him, then maybe this will manifest into a Troy Smith type of offense. And I think people miss that. But at the same time, if you have an established player that's as good as Braxton Miller, I just have a hard time not throwing out a guy that can win any game for you, because I'm not sure JT can do that yet. Maybe he will next year, maybe he will in the future, but I think people just are tired of the athlete at quarterback. I think they just want a real quarterback, but that doesn't mean it's better for what Ohio State wants to do.
You know, I mean, again, all of this, I don't think any of this is a criticism of JT Barrett or a criticism of Braxton Miller. No. If you have two good quarterbacks, I mean, what a great problem to have. I mean, it is interesting to think about that we live in a football world where the guy who won the Super Bowl, that quarterback, once basically was sort of told to leave his college because they were going to put in the next guy. You know, at NC State, they had Russell Wilson and Mike Glennon. Both of them are now starting quarterbacks in the NFL, but Russell Wilson moved on because they sort of were ready for the next guy. So, I mean, you never know 100% for sure how things are going to shake out. From what you've seen of JT this year, Bill, does he seem like a guy that you think would make a very good case to be the quarterback in 2015 no matter what?
I think JT's been very good. I think better than, I would say, most people anticipated after looking pretty shaky against Navy and very shaky against Virginia Tech. I think JT's come along very nicely. If he continues at the pace that he's at, I mean, we could be talking about a guy who finishes with 40 touchdown passes this year.
Yeah, I mean, his stats are crazy
yeah.
right now.
And if that, I mean, it's hard to overlook that. And I mean, I don't envy Urban Meyer for having to make a decision between a healthy Braxton Miller and JT Barrett. I think that JT can do more this season to put himself more in the conversation. I think Urban Meyer is going to feel some kind of loyalty to Braxton Miller and feel like Braxton Miller is going to at least get a shot to become the quarterback of this team again if he's healthy.
Okay. Rapid fire. First of all, it's going to be interesting because it'll be 2 full years that Braxton has played in game almost, and his recovery period is going to probably take him into fall camp. So I think that it's almost a long shot that he'll be completely ready, and I think JT's going to get all the reps in the spring, and that creates another aspect to it. But here's kind of what I was talking about a little bit earlier, and I want to bring in a fan comment from original or Orange Brown fan. So he's seen a lot of great quarterback play over the years. So he said, we have seen an article early from this newspaper, which I wrote, that quoted Meyer saying Miller was the quarterback next year. Mm-hmm. And I think at that point, what else is he going to say? Of course, you know, but then the comment continues and says, in the light of the way Barrett has been playing, if he keeps maturing, that's going to be a real issue. He has already established himself as a better passer, which I think is an interesting point of view and a very common point of view. Is he a better passer? I don't know if that's the case. But
I think Braxton probably has a better arm.
A bigger arm.
I think it looks nicer. I mean, but the assertion that JT is already a better passer than somebody who's been doing it for 3 years, I think is a little bit flawed, and I don't know why everybody thinks that, but they do. As he continues, the wide receivers and tight ends, despite their love for Miller, are going to want to be with Barrett more because of the chemistry they've built. Miller only threw for 2,000 yards last season, not exactly eye-popping numbers. But here's the ongoing dilemma. It's a very, very informed comment. We appreciate it. If Meyer chooses Miller next year, not only does Barrett lose a productive season in the critical portion of his development, but all the future top QBs that Ohio State's now recruiting are negatively affected by the succession chain. How is this issue resolved if they go back to Miller based on just the reaction that it might make not only for the team, but for the guys we're trying to bring in?
You know, I don't know that it changes that much, because if Braxton Miller was healthy, the chain is very interesting. I think the chain is real. I mean, you're the recruiting guy. The chain is real. We can't pretend that playing time and how many years you're going to get to play doesn't affect quarterback recruits. But the plan would have been Braxton Miller as the starter this year, JT Barrett sitting for a second year as a redshirt freshman, and then in 2015, JT Barrett would have been right there for the starting job with potentially the chance to start for 3 years, which is all you can ask for. he would have started as a third-year player, a redshirt sophomore, a fourth-year player, and a fifth-year player if he stuck around. What has changed is that you've just changed the order of that. So JT Barrett's getting his year now. Braxton Miller would come back next year, and JT Barrett would still have 2 more years after Braxton, and in the end have 3 years as the starter. And I don't think that doesn't affect Joey Burrow. It doesn't affect Torrance Gibson. It doesn't affect Danny Clark. All that's the same.
I think it does for this reason. Now, I know that the actual amount of years that you just said don't change at all, but a month and a half ago, JT Barrett was not what he is right now, and they didn't consider him a real. I think the thought process was Torrance Gibson was going to come in and start. So now
Who thought that?
I mean, I think that. I mean, I don't know. I think that without seeing JT Barrett perform, Ohio State now has to answer for that player. Where I think a top prospect is going to come in and say, well, Braxton's going to be a senior. The other kid hasn't played yet either. Mm-hmm. I can compete. Now that we've seen that JT Barrett is on pace for 40 touchdowns and is in the conversation and people think he's a better passer than Miller, now you have to explain to guys like Torrance Gibson, well, no matter what happens next year, it looks like JT Barrett's our guy for a longer period. Sometimes I think.
But whether Miller or Barrett plays next year, does that affect that conversation?
It's affecting it right now because who they're recruiting in 2015 now. What if they lose Torrance Gibson because JT Barrett has already set the foundation of the future when that didn't exist a month ago?
Well, he's already said it. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like if your quarterbacks are so good, you can't get other quarterbacks. I mean, it's too many riches, right? But I mean, I don't know why, whether Barrett or Miller plays next year, Barrett's not going anywhere after that. I mean, potentially the way you look at it right now, with how excited people are about JT Barrett, you would now anticipate that they are set for 2015, Miller or Barrett. They're set for 16, Barrett. They're set for 17, Barrett.
And maybe 18,
assuming
depending.
he comes back as a fifth-year senior. And then we're into Danny Clark, right? Who's a 2017 recruit. I mean, you can play that game forever. There are 1,000 things that can happen and will happen and can go wrong to deviate from that plan. But I just don't know that whether or not Miller or Barrett plays next year will affect that very much.
No, Urban Meyer addressed this issue on his radio show last week. He was asked how having this situation with Braxton Miller and JT Barrett might affect future quarterback recruiting, and he did not seem very concerned about it at all. He seemed pretty confident in his ability and his coaching staff's ability to bring in quarterbacks regardless of what the landscape looks like at Ohio State. But I mean, you talk about Torrance Gibson, Ari, and you would have a better gauge of this probably than I do, but is the schools that Torrance Gibson is considering, is there anywhere that he could go that he would play earlier than he would play here at Ohio State?
You know, I mean, I'd probably go to Arizona and play right away. That's one of them. I don't know Oklahoma's quarterback's year off the top of my head, but he's pretty good, right? You know, I don't know. Mississippi State's now in it. I don't. It's not that. I think it's easier to convince a kid that they might be able to come in and get playing time when the person they're competing against isn't out there already.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing. I'm not saying Torrance Gibson's going to make his decision based on how well JT's playing, but in a recruit's mind, it's, well, there's going to be a new starter after this year.
Right.
And then I will have my chance to compete to start that year, whether it happens or not. But now if you're saying JT Barrett is going to be the starter in 2016 no matter what, that kind of changes the thinking a little bit.
Oh, but I mean, he's going, but whether or not, no matter who the starter is in 2015, JT Barrett's the starter in 2016.
But that wasn't necessarily a fact a month ago.
Well, but again, what a great, if that's your problem.
Yeah.
But JT Barrett, again, let's not sell short JT Barrett. I mean, we wrote in our QB Quest series last week about quarterback recruiting. JT Barrett did not have the offer in-state from Texas early that may have made him stay in-state. But he was a highly ranked guy. This was a guy that Urban Meyer and Tom Herman sort of chose to go get him. He was a highly rated, the first quarterback they recruited here. They like a lot about him. He had the ACL tear his senior year, which I think added some uncertainty to that situation. He's maybe not as flashy as some guys, but I think what he has been so far is what they thought he would be. And I think in their minds, they certainly thought this was a guy that could come in and be a multi-year starter at Ohio State. Maybe not play this well in this situation, but I don't know that anybody at Ohio State is surprised that JT Barrett was going to come in here and be a quarterback for a while.
I think the vision now is to get a guy like JT Barrett is reliable. Like we said, he doesn't turn the ball over, he makes good decisions, and he can let other people in the offense shine. And I think as Ohio State continues to recruit the offensive approach the way they have, they should have a Dontre Wilson in every class, a Jalen Marshall in every class, an Ezekiel Elliott in every class. And when you start doing that, it makes the quarterback position. I mean, Urban, when we asked him about the quarterback position 3 weeks ago before the Cincinnati game, he said a quarterback is the product of what's around him. And I think if J.T. Barrett's already playing this well and Ohio State gains experience and stuff, I think he's going to be a very productive player.
And I'll say, I think at times people may think that we have been beating the drum for Braxton and been unsure about JT. I have never been unsure about JT Barrett as what JT Barrett's going to be in 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
I was unsure about JT Barrett being thrown in as the starter 2 weeks before a season as a redshirt freshman. You don't get it overnight. It takes time to develop. I think JT Barrett has every attribute by the time he's a third year, fourth year, fifth year college player to be as good as basically any quarterback in the country.
And it wasn't anything against JT as much as it was a compliment to Braxton. I mean, this offense was running a certain way.
And you can't forget how good Braxton is.
Yeah, it's like everybody's like, who's Braxton Miller? Oh, the two-time defending Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year. I mean, the guy was ridiculous. So it's not that Ohio State is doomed because JT Barrett doesn't have the qualities to grow into a great player. And, this is the issue. They just lost one of the best players in college football. It's simple.
And frankly, with Braxton Miller, as we've learned, it's great to have a number two guy behind him that you can trust. I mean, every year, Kenny Guyton got a lot of love in Columbus because he had opportunities to play because Braxton Miller got hurt. JT Barrett's gotten this chance. If Braxton Miller comes back and you make him the starter in 2015, you have no idea how that season's going to unfold. And guess what? If a worst-case scenario happens and Braxton Miller goes down for any reason, who's coming in?
Your guy.
The guy who started every game the year before. That's a pretty good situation.
Yeah, I think I said I don't envy Urban Meyer having to make the decision, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad position to be in.
No, I think
you have a choice between
perfect position.
Yeah, choice between two-time Big Ten Player of the Year or a guy who's clearly blossoming into a pretty good quarterback.
Especially when you take into account that Braxton Miller, even before this, hasn't been healthy his entire career. He still has a rigorous recovery process to go through. He's going to enter fall camp maybe coming off of that injury weeks before, so they're going to take it slow. I mean, they took it so slow this time, and you know what I mean? Imagine how slow it's going to be next year. So I think it's going to be, I think expecting Braxton to be 100% ready to go and to be the Braxton of last year, next year is a stretch. I really do. I think that this is kind of an interesting topic, but I think if you look at just the history and the patterns and the way things are trending, I just think that it's kind of a stretch to think that it's all going to just pan out and Braxton's going to come in on a white horse with a sword,
And I do think that if he does come in on a white horse with a sword and is completely healthy and is awesome, I would guess that Urban Meyer would find something to do that JT Barrett's not going to sit on the bench
a little bit,
and not move for a 12-game regular season.
Or vice versa. Could you do something with? I mean, everyone's obsessed with the idea of.
I mean, I don't think it means you turn Braxton Miller into an H-back.
But like, if Braxton's a quarterback, and they're both on the field at the same time, I mean, it's like the Beckman Terrell Pryor days, or like do something. If JT is a quarterback on a certain play, is there something else Braxton can do? I'm not saying change his position, but
yes, here and there, so JT can get cobwebs
and
on him.
And they both kind of feel like they're needed and wanted.
Would you be shocked if Urban Meyer and Tom Herman came up with some kind of crazy thing to do on that? And
I'd be shocked if they didn't.
Put defenses on
too much talent on the field, kind of like this room.
It's an interesting thing. We just spent a lot of time talking about 2015. I think it's an interesting sort of state of the program situation, and you cannot deny that this is it's an interesting topic for this team. Is it the number one thing facing this week? No. They got to go out and beat Rutgers. They got to go out and beat Penn State and then beat Illinois and lead up to Michigan State. But, it as much as that early loss did change things, they're in a very interesting spot right now.
They are in a very interesting spot, and I think that I think that Ohio State fans have reason to be kind of excited about the future of this team. Maybe not necessarily this year.
Right.
Which is interesting because last year, after everything was so perfect for 2 years,
right,
when they lost to Michigan State, it was like the world fell out. Like everything that they had built,
right,
kind of seemed like it crumbled. And then when Braxton got hurt, it just seemed like there was so much negative momentum around the program.
Right.
So, I mean, a month of winning and maybe discovering that you might have the quarterback of the future already in hand kind of makes it a little bit better when you think about the youth around him, too.
I said when the Virginia Tech loss to me was officially the honeymoon was over. But now this is Now you're just married, and you know what? I mean,
Marriage is good
it's a
sometimes.
pretty good marriage. And actually, it's my 19th anniversary today. So
What?
happy anniversary to my wife, and I'm spending it with these guys.
I'm in
Sorry.
love too.
Thank you for joining us this week for our Ohio State Big Ten show here on cleveland.com, along with Ari Wasserman and Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, building up with our coverage all week until the Buckeyes host Rutgers at 3:30 on Saturday.